I'm just going to welcome everyone. Sorry, we've been having some technical difficulties with Zoom. What a surprise, as everyone says, but welcome to Friday's Creative Tech. And Fridays, this is our Capture This session, again, brought to you from the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography. I will say it one more time for those newbies who don't know that I am Gloria Kondrup and I'm the Executive Director of the HMCT, Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography. And Creative Tech Week, this is our final day, so it's been a long week for everyone. Robbie Knock, who's here, is the wonderful Director of Entrepreneurship and Professional Practice, who has helped put all of this together. Capture This, though, is a multi-platform program that the HMCT is, this is its inaugural program that studies the linguistic trends born within digital communication and platforms, and also the transformative effects that emergent technologies have on our use of languages, and what these occurrences will reveal about the future of communications. Today, we're definitely going to talk about, it's part of the future theme, the future of communication and the future of graphic design, and how is graphic design fitting in this new technological space. So I have three fabulous panelists who are going to do brief presentations, I hope. And then we'll have hopefully a lively discussion about what is graphic design within the space of creative technologies. Graphic design, which would embody, of course, typography, since it is the spine that runs through the body of graphic design. And I'd like to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Mike Abbink, who is currently the Executive Creative Director of the Brand Experience and Design team within IBM Studios. Before this, he was creative director at the Museum of Modern Art, Wolf Olins. We have a whole list of Mike, of what he used to do. Most important to me is Mike is also a typeface designer. He has a passion for typography, and his typefaces include, of course, FFPVIT, which he started here as a student at ArtCenter College of Design. We have to say that. Milo, Brando, and of course, IBM Flex, which is an open source typeface that goes across multi-script languages. We also have LucienneRoberts. Hi, Lucy. Lucy is a graphic designer, writer, and educator, and the founder of LucienneRoberts Studio, co-founder of advocacy initiative, Graphic Design N. And your practice and research characterized by your interest in ethical design. Lucy is also has also curated several major exhibitions in London, and a current one now is in, I believe there's an
installation of mine in Berlin.
In Berlin, and now you are at the Design Museum in New York, is it?
Yeah, we've designed
a new show in New York.
Here. Yeah.
She is also the HMCT International Fellow, who is doing an extensive project on Anthony Froschog, and is going to be publishing next year a new project called TN2. Our final panelist is Brad Bartlett, designer, educator, and author. How can I say, you are probably one of my favorite Los Angeles, I hate to peg you as a Los Angeles designer, who has won many awards. He is the director of Transmedia Graphic Design, the graphic design department here at ArtCenter College of Design. And he started a curriculum that deals with, I think, the future of media and graphic design. You also do a lot of work for LinkedIn Learning, and I know you do a lot of work in museums. But anyway, I'm going to stop because we have several presentations to do. I want to welcome everyone. At the end, you'll be able to have the opportunity to do Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat room, and hopefully we'll get to it. Each presenter is going to give about 5 to 10 minutes of their work. Lucy, we're going to start with you, if you'd like. I'm going to disappear, and if you have any problems, we have a lot of technical help in the background, okay? And then we'll move on to Mike. Hopefully things will work. and then to Brad, and then we'll come back for a lively discussion. So Lucy, the screen is yours.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. Hope everyone can see that. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 projects. My background is actually not in the digital realm, it's very much in the print realm, and it's in book design. And then I moved on to exhibition design, which is also a very tactile in many ways experience, and very physical experience. But I'm talking about a particular project here called Hope to Note, which was an exhibition and book and curation project that I worked on with my colleague David Shaw. And it's particularly relevant to this particular discussion. It was called Hope to Note. It was about graphics and politics in the period 2008 to 2018. And it was at the Design Museum in London. It looked a bit like this from a design point of view. It looked intentionally energetic, messy, quite confrontational, quite difficult. The work was incredibly diverse, some amateur, some professional, some party political, some very personally political, and so on. But why it's important to this particular conversation is because the spine that ran all the way through it was actually the relationship of technology and the dissemination of political ideas. And given the period we were looking at, 2008 to 2018, technology played a greater and greater part as that 10-year period progressed. As people arrived, they were greeted by a wall that you can see on the right-hand side with those big circles. And that was our kind of info technology wall, if you like, which charted just a few of the many key events during that period, which ranged from the use of technology in Barack Obama's campaign, for example, through to certain hashtags that proliferated and so on. Just looking at the book, just to give you an example of some examples of some of the projects that we included, of course, there were exactly what you would expect, protest graphics and so on, as shown on the right-hand side. But also we worked with some data visualization specialists, for example, called Pulsar, who've been doing a project with Twitter, looking at the proliferation of certain messages, that is shown here actually relating to a protest in Turkey. We also, of course, looked at the juxtaposition, if you like, given the title, Hope to Note. This, of course, grew out of the Hope poster for Barack Obama's campaign by Shepard Fairey. And then we showed, of course, what happened to it later, how although he'd made it available actually as a download, it proliferated into many, many memes, some respectful, some not. And of course, it ended with Nope, with Trump. On the right-hand side, you see 2 projects. One is a student project, actually, that was looking at surveillance, government surveillance and word-based surveillance, which again, very pertinent to the conversation in hand today. And on the right, we looked at the reappropriation of graphic images. This is Pepe the Frog, who'd started as quite a benign character and ended up being reappropriated by the far right. And it was impossible in a way for the original artist to reclaim that image. We, of course, looked again, as I said, at more sort of orthodox ways of making protest. On the left is an artwork by the artist Dred Scott. And on the right, we looked at the deliberate and intentional falsifying of ideas in campaigns, political campaigns, the intervention by external countries, actually, in this case, in the presidential campaign. And then on the right-hand side, you see a project called the Peace Factory from 2012, which is a very grounds-up project, started in Israel. So as you can see, an incredibly diverse mix, but all showing one way or another, many of them showing anyway, the impact that current technologies have had in how messages are disseminated for good and for bad, I have to say. Thinking more about personal projects, personal to us as a studio, but also professional projects as a studio, of course, something that we've got very involved in the last few years is climate change. And I'm now going to talk about 2 projects. One was called Non-Pavilion, and it was at the London Design Festival 2 years ago in 2019. And it was probably the first project that I got involved with, although I have done with others since, that kind of looked at designers' role in climate change actually in terms of our responsibility for it, are we as graphic designers most particularly actually partly responsible for climate change? And that was the intention behind this project. It was to raise that concern really, which is a tough one for I think many designers. And it was called Non-Pavilion because the London Design Festival traditionally has lots of grand pavilions, often in grand spaces. And this was not one of those. This was actually just 4 poles. And you arrived at the V&A, it was held at the V&A in the courtyard. There were these 4 poles, you can see the orange fluorescent poles here. But people were given iPads and they were asked to look at various pieces of AR that were all about climate change. And for the first time, we as graphic designers, so we were behind the identity for this project, not the 3D, but for the identity, we got involved in AR. We made a piece of AR. So this was our piece, and it was about rebalancing the world, really, rebalancing between people, planet, and profit. So that's what these 3 staircases represent. And they go from black and white to multicolored. And it was a kind of positive message that we can change things, we can make it better. But for us, it was a great experience because we've never done a piece of AR before, and we learned a great deal by doing it actually, and trying to get our heads around the idea of this space, this new space. So with that in mind, I'm just going to finish with a project that Clifford's going to run for me, actually. It's an animation, it runs for a minute, and I'm at the moment visiting professor, bizarrely but wonderfully, in the engineering department at the University of Southampton, and I am there to help engineering students communicate their ideas more effectively. There's another visiting professor whose expertise lies in climate change, and so we worked together on this animation, and it's been a really interesting process for me because I wrote the text. It's almost a poem, really. I love writing, I love literature, and it's great just to be doing that, quite apart from animating it and working with the sound designer on it. But it's interesting because I think the feel of it, in a way, is quite reminiscent of animation that's been around for a long time. But again, for me, it was a really useful experience to revisit, to rethink about how we make animation now, and to think about what movement and sound can bring to graphic design. So Clifford, can you run this for me, please? Over to Clifford.
Wow. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, we'll get a chance to talk more about that afterwards, in terms of how you use this. Mike, if you're ready, I don't know if you're ready to, great. We're gonna ask Mike Abbink to show us a little bit of his interaction with typography, work design, and technology. Mike, take it away.
I think we lost his audio. Mike, are you there? Your audio is.
Are you there?
If I think if you had your iPods, I don't know if they're connected or.
Yeah, I think it's you're connected via your
or AirPods, excuse me.
AirPods, but we can't hear you. Okay, so we'll wait for Mike to rejoin us. So Brad, I guess.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Mike, we can hear you.
All right, that's
All right.
fantastic. That's fantastic news. So now I just need to be able to share screen, and I don't see a share screen button anymore. Do I need permission to do such? Have you made me a presenter?
You should be able to share your screen, but let me see if I can.
Yeah, I don't see.
Let's see.
An option to do so.
Is Paloma or Robbie, are you able to give him permission to do, because I don't have that on my end. I think it has to come from the host, not the co-host.
Yeah, because that option's not available to me at the moment.
Yeah, I just don't have access to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't see anything on my side either. There's no green share screen icon at the bottom.
Nope.
Let's see. Here, try it now. Does it show up?
Nope.
Okay.
Well, let's Mike, we'll work with you on this while Brad presents his, and then we will come back to this in a second.
And if anything, Mike, you can always comment on Lucy and Brad and join the conversation. We'll make it work. We'll try.
Great. Cool.
Okay.
I'll go on mute.
Brad Bartlett, take it away. It's your screen.
Okay. Hopefully this goes okay. Always a little bit nervous about Zoom, as we all are. Can we see this okay, guys? Okay. I have a lot of video content too, so hopefully that plays smoothly on the other end. Always a little bit concerned about that as well. So here we are. Everything shows up okay on your end, you guys? Okay, nice. So how do we design across traditional and emerging media through the orchestration of generative systems, multi-dimensional narratives, and interactive environments? So what I'd like to do first, you guys, is play a compilation video that curates some of the projects across our transmedia classes. And these classes are the Advanced Transmedia Studio class that I teach, the Type 5 Transmedia Studio class that I teach, and also a class called Media Texture taught by Miles Mazzi and Ivan Cruz. right, you guys. So how can we create generative systems using code-based tools? And what I'd like to show now is a project that my studio did for ArtCenter. We designed the Viewbook a few years ago. And like the ArtCenter experience, we wanted every cover to be unique. So what we did was we designed an algorithm that pulled from different shapes. And these shapes were inspired by the work of Alvin Lustig. And in creating the Viewbook, we are always interested in kind of building a bridge from the past to the future. Alvin Lustig was both a student and later an instructor at ArtCenter in the late 30s. And so we found profound inspiration in some of these shapes. And in many ways, we felt like these shapes and his way of using these shapes kind of prefigured the way that we work in generative design processes today. We designed an algorithm that drew from those 18 different modules and reconfigured them in different ways through rotation, through color change, through different patterns that were pulled up. And we found that some of these combinations were really quite beautiful. I'm reminded of a quote from Brian Eno where he talks about being less a musician and more the idea of a planner or a programmer that sets things into motion, and then he becomes an audience to the results. And I found that some of these modules were really quite beautiful. This showcases a few more. Each book is numbered, so there were 36,000 or 34,500 undergrad view books, and then about 6,000 graduate view books. This shows some of the typographic architecture on the interior. The idea of the grid was really important to us. We feel like, the curriculum at ArtCenter is kind of like very structured, but there's a way for students to navigate that curriculum and customize it according to their own interests. And so even the grid wanted to talk to that idea. Some more interior spreads. And the other thing that's really important about ArtCenter is that we learn by making. So we wanted to make sure that we foregrounded a lot of images that depicted students working in their laboratory settings. And I'm just so hopeful that we get back to that sometime soon. This is for the graduate view book. And again, kind of extending that same kind of graphic language throughout the view book. Here we put together a quick video that shows the process of our design. Okay, great. All right. So how can we respond to the changing social and technological conditions of communication? What I'm going to show next, you guys, is an initiative that we started in spring of 2020 in response to migrating to online learning. This is the last photograph that I took in my classroom on South Campus at ArtCenter before we had to evacuate. So, you know, we got together, me and a few of the instructors and some of my TAs, and thought, how can we recreate our classroom as a kind of virtual space? So this is the recreation of our classroom in a WebVR format. And what was so kind of interesting about this process is that it allowed us to have more visitors come to our final presentation than we would have had if we were in a physical space. And it also began to give us a kind of platform for archiving the student work as well. So what you're seeing here is our large B3 classroom down in the basement of the 950 building. And we're using the student posters as a way to enter into their individual web pages. So you would simply click on a selection of posters and you would be taken to a dedicated web page, which I think should happen here in just a moment. Let me skip ahead. I know we're short on time. So this will be a dedicated web page to a student project. This is from student Christopher Gonzalez, and this is his project for the California Science Center. And you can really see the full scope of his transmedia project, where he's working across print, screen, and ultimately spatial media. He also designed a microsite as well, and a micro identity for an exhibition called Designing in Zero Gravity. And the irony of that was that we all felt like we were teaching and learning in zero gravity at the beginning of the pandemic, using Zoom as our primary tool of communication. So again, it kind of shows how his graphic language inhabits all these different contexts, from print to screen to spatial media. Skip ahead here a little bit. How can we create tools that invite the user to share in the act of making? This next project is by student Zeke Waddles, and it's for the Dub Lab, which is an online radio station. And what was cool about Zeke's process is he was interested in moving beyond the prescriptive limitations of Adobe software to create his own tools and technologies, which would enable users to participate in the act of creating a design experience, or in this case, in the creation of a dynamic graphic language. So he's hacking into a Kinect sensor, he's using TouchOSC, his classmates are having fun with it, and he's recording the results. This shows how that graphic language begins to inhabit the real world in a spatial context. This shows his logotype, which is pulling from the idea of an oscilloscope. He designed a typeface, a 5x8 grid typeface based upon those same design rules and principles. And then Zeke created an online tool that would allow all his classmates to create their own posters. So you can manipulate the forms through those sliders on the right-hand side of the page. But more than that, Zeke connected these posters to a printer, which would output them to create a kind of mashup of old school analog technology and new school digital technology. And here's some of the results from that process. What was also really cool is that Dub Lab really liked his project, and they invited Zeke to participate in the 20th anniversary celebration. So some quick videos of how fun that was. The next project is by a student, Taka Ui. And with this project, the prompt is, how can code-based tools be an integrated part of the design process? So Taka was really interested in using processing and P5.js as a sketching tool. And the idea of bringing the user into the process of creating legibility and having fun with these logotypes was a big part of his design intent. This is Taka kind of sketching out some ideas. Taka also wanted to reimagine the idea of a poster, not as something static or inert, but as something alive and dynamic that would react to one's spatial proximity. Some more sketching with his logotypes. And really the logotypes come alive whenever the user is interacting with them. Here's a final logotype, something very friendly and accessible to make the idea of a technology conference a little bit more palatable for folks that may not necessarily be into those sorts of things. This is his microsite. And the cursor is really kind of drawing a path that the user takes through the site. And implicit in that gesture is the idea of how data is kind of collected and stored and utilized even without our knowing it. Posters in the real world. He also designed a symposium, proposed a symposium that would talk about artificial intelligence and ethics. And here the cursor has been replaced by a series of images that would be utilized to train machines to see. So he's using machine learning technology. This is Taka's installation. And what he's doing is he's creating a deep fake based upon all the classmates across his classes and all his teachers, kind of a deep fake superorganism. He's also created a series of images that are pulling from all the typefaces on his operating system. So he's in many ways training the machine to typeset. And these are all the images that were used in that data training set. So how can we design systems and organize communities to counter the inherent bias in knowledge creation? This project is by Sharon Park, and it's a rebrand for Wikipedia. It's from our Type 5 Transmedia class. These posters really kind of talk about the serendipity of search, where you can go from Tupac to the Pope in 8 clicks. But more than that, Sharon was like really interested in who writes for Wikipedia and some of the kind of ethics behind the idea of creating knowledge and disseminating knowledge. And some of these statistics were really quite startling. 90% of everyone that writes for Wikipedia, they're men. And 20% of the world is writing 80% of the content. And only 20% of the biographies on Wikipedia are of women. So those statistics were really quite startling when she presented them to the class. She was also very interested in designing a user experience that would accommodate different languages. So this shows how the front page of Wikipedia might change according to different linguistic sets. Also very interested in making the process of editing Wikipedia really accessible and easy. So she started to work with the content management system as well. Here's her identity collateral, postcards. And then she proposed a conference or symposium that would talk directly about some of these inequities within knowledge sharing and knowledge creation. So this is WikiRoom. And the idea that Wikipedia was founded on the belief that knowledge belongs to all was kind of a guiding principle throughout her project. She wanted to take that one step further. So how can we make the search for knowledge a playful and immersive experience using simple tools and inexpensive materials? So Sharon created a kind of spatial experience using virtual reality. This is some of the initial sketches for her project. And I began to ask really important questions. How does graphic design exist in a spatial context? What does it mean when every single surface has the potential to be interactive? And here's a quick process video that Sharon created. And so I'd like to end the presentation with a quick thought. And this is from Design for Different Futures. And this is something that was written by Zoe Ryan that I'm paraphrasing. How can we use the tools of design to shift perspectives, stimulate dialogue, exchange ideas, and investigate new ways of seeing and being in the world? You know, how can design be more than just a thing or a process, but also be a way of asking questions? So with that, I conclude my presentation and I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Brad. Mike, are we ready? Is it going to work?
No, I still don't see.
Okay.
But that's okay, Mike. I've got you covered here. I will share those sites that you linked us to, and I hope everybody can see that. And then you can speak over me and just direct me from one slide to the next.
All right, I'll do my best. I'll do my best. There's a few missing that were, you know, behind a login that I wanted to share, but it's fine. I'll do without those. So I just wanted to share a little bit about kind of my product design world and kind of the design language world that I've been deeply involved in over the last 4.5 years at IBM. And start from the beginning so you can get a taste of the journey and also the kind of design that's required. It's maybe not as sexy as some design we've seen today and that's out there in the world for sure. It's very targeted to software design. But that said, you know, technology that enables that work is pretty cool and allows for some cool workflows and allows for designers to share work and create design work that feels connected to an ecosystem. So I think there's an interesting story there. So believe it or not, when I joined IBM, there was not a cohesive design language that was for the entire business, whether you were making digital experiences or print experiences. Anything that would inform advertising, nothing. There was very little in place. It was basically some colors and a logo and some stuff done like 10, 20 years ago. And so we quickly realized, hey, we need to get a design philosophy for one. IBM did not have that either. So we created a design philosophy. And one of the first projects born out of this whole process was IBM Plex, which is what you're seeing here. This is kind of the kind of marketing launch, if you will, for Plex. We needed a little microsite to kind of talk about the story, and so that's the first kind of thing we created. And the year prior was just doing a bunch of design work for IBM, and out of doing that work emerged all of the things that led to what became the design language. So if you click on the next tab, your next browser tab. So basically I'm walking you through the step-by-step challenges and kind of output. So the design language was kind of the next thing we had to really work on, and we wanted to build a design language built on the philosophy or express the philosophy, and then was designed to be the DNA of anything, IBM. And by the way, all the stuff that you're seeing is open source and available. None of it's behind a login or private. So design philosophy, yep, number one, you can watch that little video. I wouldn't play it now, but it's a great little video, speaks to our philosophy. So it's here. And then there's principles right underneath in the next left nav. And then, of course, all of the elements required. So you can check this out on your own. So if you click into typography, or let's do 2x grid, I think you get the idea that type is important. The other big piece was the grid system, and if you scroll down, there's a little video. You could play that. There's a bunch of these great little animations where we try to bring the philosophy or the element to life. no volume, I guess. There is some voiceover here, which is great. But really it demonstrates that the grid concept is for all mediums. You can build a house with it, event kind of experiences and architecture, as you see here. And you can build all the digital experiences. You can build the components on it. There's a microgrid. So this kind of animation allows the story to come through on the grid and why it's so valuable and what you can do with it, and that it is the underlying kind of engineering for anything you make that's expressing the IBM brand and you know, within and delivering any experience. So we can move on from this. There's iconography you can go into. And just, yeah, check out this library. So there's almost, I don't know, I want to say like 17 or 1800 UI icons we've created. And again, this is coming from the IBM designers within our community. They're open source, it's available, it's a massive library. If you click into app icons, we've created this resource. And again, there's all of the guidance and documentation is there. And actually, if you go above on the design tab there, you see above the library, yep. If you scroll down, the one thing I wanted to highlight about all of this work is the design language is created primarily by IBMers, my team. We had some agency help along the way, certainly, but primarily it's our team. The site was created by our team, and all of the content written is created by the designers themselves on my team. And I think it's an important note to make that the designers, at least in a design system environment, and certainly the environment we've created and culture we've created, the designers are not only creating the visual systems and solving all those problems that go along with it, creating the final assets, and then they're creating the website experience, which is all the documentation and the guidelines and usage to use those assets and elements. So the designer's role is pretty extensive and certainly complicated. We can go to illustration next on the list, which is a great thing also, where this is where we use some more, and let's play this one. Some more agency help, a small firm called Story TK. It's just like 2-3 people. They're great at animation. They helped us kind of get to the foundation of the illustrations, and then we used our illustration I'd say experts that live within the community at IBM. We gathered them up, created what we call a guild, and started to talk about what's missing. What do we need to create as a guild? What's useful across IBM? And we created these 3 styles: a line style, a flat style, and isometric style. Again, everything driven on the grid, using DNA from Plex and other principles from the design system. And then we've created this kind of language, three different ones. We're growing them as we speak. There's some more styles coming. We want to introduce kind of what you can do with typography and with Plex as a style. And then we have downloadable kits. If you scroll, actually click into flat style or isometric, actually. And so for each of these styles, if you scroll down, there's a downloadable Adobe Illustrator starter kit. So you can download that kit. It has tons and tons of examples in it. And you can begin, you can see the grid system. There's canvases in place, tons of examples to work with, foundational elements to work with. So you can begin creating illustrations with these kits. And again, created by IBMers, and it's a massive body of work, especially if you think about the work that's required to make each of these styles kind of usable, if you will, at a scale, plus all the guidance. Then we can go into, let's go to Carbon actually now. So with it, once we had this design language, it of course affected the design system, the digital design system used for our products, right? All of our software, that needed to all get updated and upgraded to reflect the new design language. So we can whiz through. Let's go to the components, for example. So let's click on button. So here's an example of the team. Again, they design, of course, the component itself. All the specifications are there, pixel measurements and such, do's and don'ts, color, hover states, the accessibility, focal states, all that kind of stuff for tabbing. And then, of course, we have to, show the live coded demo right here. So that's the actual button. There's multiple states to it that you can see to the right. There's a danger button, tertiary, secondary. So all of the states and variants, as we call them, are there. And then if you keep scrolling down, there's the guidance for that button, the do's and don'ts. Oops, lost you all. Hang on. Okay.
We've still got you here, Mike.
Yeah, okay, great. No, it came back up. My screen went dark. So anyway, my point is, again, the point of conception, creation, or research, creation, exploration, refinement, sharing out, getting feedback, refinement again to the state in which it's finalized to some degree. It's always getting updated. But when we reach some state where, yes, it needs to be published, then we have to go through the whole process of articulating how to use this little guy called the button. So then let's go to the next tab in the browser, the Envision there. I just want to show you how the team works. So this is some color updates we've been recently working on. And again, it's been weeks and weeks worth of work. This is the Envision. The page is not quite live yet, but this is all this color token work we've been doing to make the color tokens more, I guess, smart, if you will, for developers to use. And again, this is one designer working it all out, lots of research, lots of back and forth with other people. And then, of course, they create this page and write all the content themselves. So I guess my point in this is that the designers close to me and on my team are visual designers, UX designers. They're becoming more and more experts in accessibility. Although we have an accessibility team of experts attached to us, it's through working together that even the designers are becoming experts in and of themselves in accessibility and how to use color and the functionality and the requirements of making a component or a pattern very accessible. Our developers are also becoming experts at that. And they're becoming writers and better writers. So anyway, my point is, it's detailed oriented. I would say it's more like information design, if you will. But at the same time, if you think about what those elements are and where they live and what they actually create by the use of others, they find this broad kind of landscape that they live in. But the people who kind of own and maintain it and kind of created it are these kind of jack of all trades, very T-shaped folks. So let's jump to another page. What's next up there in the tabs? Oh yeah, so we keep going down the board, right? We did the philosophy typeface, an overall design language. Now we have a design system that's completely updated. What does it mean for the IBM Workplace to take this language and now implement it into our environments? So this group of folks also connected to the brand team focused on the IBM Workplace Design. And so again, this is open for you to check out. It's not closed, but it's the IBM design language coming to life in architecture and environments and work environments. And so this is very cool too. They discovered and added to the system by manifesting the language and philosophies and such into materials, into three-dimensional spaces and environments. How does one work? What's the best way to work? What's the IBM way to work? And again, the elements show up in here in different kinds of ways. We may route one of the elements for like an icon that's used in a piece of software or a UI that might find itself routed out of stone or wood or Corian in an environment. So the difference is, spectacular, not just in scale, but in material and use and emotional connectivity. What that icon is meaning in an environment versus what it might mean in a UI, even though they might be the same, is quite different based upon where you run into that little icon. So if we go to the next tab, it's the event team. Next tab in the browser, I think. Oh, I didn't. Okay, so you can do this, Robbie. You can, if you go to the upper right of the website, there's a little grid icon there on the right side, upper right corner where the search is. Yeah, exactly. This is this kind of gives you our IBM design landscape. It's all of these disciplines and practices, and the first step was to get everyone cohesive. And now that we've done that, and actually go to event design. Yeah, and so now what we're doing is we're creating a platform, and everyone who owns these sites or these practices and insights and assets, we are going to merge all of that content together into one platform. So we'll be in one website, and through architecture and through like switchers and such, you will be able to navigate across this content in a much more connected way. At the center of that new platform experience, we will have a catalog, which will allow a user to search all kinds of assets. There's lots of metadata and name classification involved, but it'll allow a designer or a researcher or a UX designer to find the available assets from across the entire ecosystem and begin to build their own kind of slice of the pie, if you will. So instead of having a standalone website, we will now have all these sites kind of congregated and consolidated in a one platform experience. So that's coming next. But this is the event team. Again, they also have new and different ways to kind of manifest the design language and DNA into an entirely different kind of experience, right? These are more experiential. They're part of events. They cover a broad range of kind of scales and environments as well, and include everything, right? There's tons of digital and immersive digital experiences. There's demos, software demos. There's the architecture. And actually one of the earlier little animations you saw showed some of the kind of architecture of the events. And what I love to see in some of those drawings is that the landscape or the footprint of that event uses the grid. The architecture has been built using the grid and has small ones all the way up to massive 2-story structures, all grid based on our units, 2x units. And then the two-dimensional graphics that get applied to that architecture, those kind of trade show kind of booths, that's the grid system on a 2D situation, and communications and graphics and such of various scales. And then there's the screens or other immersive digital experiences within that space that again use the grid and all of the other design language elements in a screen-based experience, right? So if you stack up all and layer all these kinds of experiences, they're all stacked together, working together in the same place, working the same way, expressing the same DNA and language in various ways, but cohesively and designed to work that way. And it's one of the, I think, few systems that is scaled and designed to work from a tiny 16 by 16 situation and a component or an icon all the way up to, a 2-story tall icon or, image or whatever, right? So anyway, with that said, I'll leave it there. I think, yeah.
Well,
That's
thanks.
enough.
Well, thank you, everyone. Robbie, and I have no problem, you know, even though it's a little after 12, I have no problem continuing this discussion because I think I think it's fine for me if we can just continue. But what I find interesting from all the presentations is, Mike, what you've done, and Brad and Lucy, all of your work is rooted in this traditional foundation of design and the use of grids, the understanding of grids and technology, and not technology, but the understanding of grids, typography. It all seems that you start from a really basic understanding. And where you've gone with it, the technology just means you're changing what you understand basically. And the new technologies are just another technology. Do you find that working, especially Mike, when you work with new designers coming in, it's almost like, you must require that they understand the foundational principles of design before they can even understand technology?
Yeah, I mean, I try to. Sometimes it's the reverse. Some of them come in with, less understanding of some of those great principles regarding typography. If they're a UX person, they may have enough, but they know the technology really well, right? They know the tools. They can animate. They can prototype and animate too. They can do architectures. They use Figma and Sketch. They can build Figma and Sketch kits, which is also extremely difficult. So they have technical chops off the charts, but maybe they don't know grids well enough, or maybe they missed out on someone like me who would like hound them on grids and kind of a certain approach to typography that I try to adhere to. So maybe they've missed that element. So they come to a team like mine or Carbon, my system team. And so they have to adapt and learn. And so they bring something to the table that someone else who's had a great background and maybe knows type really well, but maybe he's never opened Figma or Sketch. And so they have to learn. Maybe they've never done the documentation. Like we've recently had a young designer join our team. She never did documentation on components and stuff. So she had to design some things. She had to learn that whole process. So she came, but she's a great designer and a great illustrator, but she didn't know these kind of tools and the technical kind of terminology, and she had to learn. So I get folks coming in from, different sides of the fence, and, technical side, and maybe tooling and UX-y. And then I have people who are very super anal about design and they've never done anything technical. So those people meet in the middle and you create the stuff that I've been showing you. And I'd say the events team is maybe more, they Brad's work I think is so inspirational to see. And I feel like everyone's dying to bring more of those opportunities down into things where you don't see them show up very much. And it's hard to bring them into software experiences or digital tooling, right? You can't, that's not where that kind of expressive design lives so much, but it could, or can we push on it? And what is that needle? So we have teams that are just dying to animate and do stuff, but yet they don't really have the landscape to do it. But the events team I showed you there, their space is much more immersive, and I think they can push on conceptual stuff a lot more, and they move toward what Brad was showing a whole lot more than my team.
And I noticed though, what's interesting, Lucy, what you're working on in the work of Anthony Froschag, right, pre-digital, and Mike, the work that you're doing with the 2x2 grid system, I'm just thinking, I'm going, oh my God, it's the same thing. It's repeated itself and Lucy, I know this is something how you work. I mean, when you look at your work, I see the same foundational underlying grids.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's definitely true, but I'm also aware that I think there's a reaction against quite a lot of that going on at the moment. Yeah. And actually, I think that, but also actually thinking about it from a political perspective, for example, something I didn't say when I was showing the Hope to Know stuff, that came out of that loud and clear, and also our experience when we've worked in party politics, is the mistrust of design that looks too finished and too slick. And that, you know, that is, I mean, that's arguably partly what happened with the Hillary campaign, for example, and also campaigns we've worked on, where the material that's being produced that looks amateur, even if it isn't, this is what's so dodgy about the whole thing, seems to have an authenticity about it.
Right.
So there's you know, this is getting very complicated actually as to, you know, what we as designers, how we carry that, because I think we as a studio found that quite difficult and quite shocking sometimes, how, you know, the less designed something appears to be, the more it's trusted actually.
That's very interesting that you mentioned, Lucy, that because when I look at what Mike has done with IBM and the design, does it make IBM less trustful because it looks so much better? I mean, and Mike, what you've brought, you know, by bringing Plex to an open source, and everything is open source that you've done. I mean, I think it's, from my perspective, it's a great service to look at, you know, this is what can be done with the organized system of design. But then do you think the perception is, well, it's from IBM, so is it really that good? Is it really that trustworthy?
Well, well, I'll take a step back because I think it's an interesting topic. A lot of what we've done and the reasons why we've done things very gritty and kind of simplistic in a way is that we want that to be foundational and DNA-like, but also know that we have like thousands of designers, literally thousands, and we make thousands of products and we do thousands of things out there of various quality, believe me, from horrific to excellent. And the system we needed to make was something that was understood and scalable and kind of easy to kind of learn, and then like Lego blocks, you know, it's simple, get it, 2x grid, okay, lay things out, left align. But what we're now moving into more and more, and you know, once we got to bring the experience together, like I said, so it's easy to consume all this stuff. But now we're going to start pushing on teams to be more expressive, understand how to tell authentic stories, and kind of start to build on top and move and just expand that thing, you know, called the design language right now, and expand it in a way that is, you know, following what people are expecting or wanting in some ways, and also what's our point of view within that space, and how do we reflect that, and all the while kind of expand and grow the way this system expresses itself. So I agree that people don't like polished stuff so much, and can respond negative to it if it's missing life and if it's missing authenticity. And so that to me is a big point of that topic, because I think you can be kind of a little bit more gritty and clean if it's authentic, and the story you tell and the story you deliver is authentic, and the product you deliver is usable and lovable and has purpose and intent, and you use it and you need it. So if you hit all those check boxes, I think you can look any way you want. Just like fashion, to me, I'm constantly looking at people and their fashions, and now anything at any time period is acceptable and cool and hip, and fashion labels have skinny jeans, and they have flare bottoms, and they have culottes, and every style of pant is perfectly available. And to me, design is kind of in that zone, right? All the aesthetics and expressions of design are all there and available. The problem is whoever is delivering an experience, it needs to be authentic and real and true, and be of a quality that is reflective of the thing that you're talking about or applying it to. And if it's somewhere in the middle and it's crappy, yet it looks slick, well, then that sucks. If it's great and it looks slick, well, that's probably okay, you know?
Yeah.
Just picking up on something that you mentioned as well about Anthony Froschau and his work. So he was at Typography, you know, working in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and he was at Ulm for some of that time, but his work doesn't look like archetypal Swiss typography, you know, because it always grew out of the language. The typography, it was much more bespoke in a way. It was less systematic and more bespoke because he was always responding to those particular words, you know, and that's what gives it its character. And it's interesting because he kind of marries together two different worlds of doing that, you know, in that it is minimal, it's very restrained, all of those things, but it's not cold. And it's such a fine line typographically.
Well, I think there's a huge complexity in the field of graphic design today. You know, Mike, what you showed us, and Brad, what you show us is, and I think this is the whole key to, you know, what's the future of, you know, our futures. And I think, Mike, you hit it on the head. It is so expansive today. I think it's moving out of this specialist again as a designer to be this incredible generalist, you know, who understands the need to work in teams, as you might say, who understands historical context of how they should be working. And again, you know, embrace technology when they can embrace it, but not realize that you have to be a technological specialist in order to communicate. So I think there's such a, is that the way you're teaching design, Brad, and the way you talk about? Mike, I think IBM should start a school, 100%. I don't know, you should start a school of the future of graphic design, you know, and, you know.
Yeah, I don't know.
we wouldn't have any students left at ArtCenter if Mike did that, right? But yeah, I mean, even in terms of pedagogy and curriculum, we think about things in a very modular way.
Yeah.
And we realize that designers aren't necessarily linear learners, you know. And so within our transmedia curriculum, we want them to pick and choose these different modules and combine them together to create these holistic projects. And that allows us to really be somewhat nimble and flexible and adapt to the changing technological conditions, but also the changing social conditions of communication. I think that's the key thing here. You know, I'm starting to think that the spine that runs through the body of graphic design is the grid, not typography, right?
Ooh.
I know that was something that, you know, one of the things that Simon always underscores, but because even modularity within pedagogy, within curriculum, all the way to modularity within typography, you know, it's
Nice.
but oftentimes I think we think about the grid not only as a system for organizing, but the grid also has symbolic value.
Yeah.
And I think the symbolic value is where you're starting to get a little bit of the critique, you know,
Yeah.
from a very kind of, you know, you think about the grid as emblematic of a very Western way of demarcating space and organizing content and things. And I think folks are questioning that. Maybe expanding that would be a better way to put it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's interesting, you know, we have a lot of discussions on grids at IBM, making things cold, and I try to explain it a certain way to people so they can get out of that, because I think it is expansive. So I likened the grid to like a lab, right? Where the lab is clean and organized, has particular tools. They've all been designed and engineered, and some of them are cold. But then what you do in the lab and how you know, you may have a tray that has grid lines on it, but inside of it, you're growing mold. And I think if your story is about the mold, then you can make it look crazy and organic and beautiful and amazing, but yet the backdrop to it might be, hey, we're scientists, we're engineers, we're measuring this organic looking thing. And so you can combine this again it's content driven. So what's the story? But it doesn't a grid does not prevent you from being organic or putting something ungrid driven on it. But then other elements or connective tissue of the narrative or of the story can be. And so you can land in a place that's very grid driven and organized, and certainly contain something that's not. And I think it's just decision making based upon content and narrative and storytelling and authenticity. And so that's what I always tell kids. And then they're like, oh, really? You can do that? I'm like, yes, you can do that. You're not like in prison, grid prison. the grid is there to help guide you, you know? And so anyway, these are huge topics.
And
It's also a way of avoiding the fear of the blank page, isn't
That's
it?
it. That's it. Yeah. I mean, having constraints are a wonderful affordance, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes you need those constraints to be creative. Otherwise, it's blue sky, and it's terrifying, you know, staring into the abyss and not having some guide rails in that process.
but isn't this the relationship, direct relationship to technology, which is built on algorithmic grids?
You know, I have another reference that I think is really important, and that's the work of Sol LeWitt, if I can bring an art reference into conversation.
Yeah.
And he was doing nothing with grid. He was doing everything with grids. And he was applying simple mathematical algorithms to create any number of permutations. And so in many ways, he was creating these wonderful organic generative structures. And that very basic building unit was the grid, right? Was that cube.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's the other part of our grid. Our grid system is a 2x grid, and we have 16 columns, and that's the digital space. But we have what we call the micro unit, and it's 8 by 8 pixels or 4 by 4 pixels that lives underneath. So if you need to do something, you know, a little bit more expressive or open, you know, you have smaller units too, which, you know, you could have something that looks as organic as you want, but technically you could imagine it being on a very, very tiny grid, and you zoom out and it looks organic or looks completely chaotic or uncontrolled. You zoom in, you're like, oh, every little kind of curve or arc or square is it's pixels, you know. Look, a photography can in high res looks not grid driven, right? But when you zoom in, everything's filling into a little pixel unit. So I think it's all what we make of it. And I think you're right. People love to poke at something, or if you take it away, then they freak out because it's a blank canvas.
And maybe if we can end with the concept that is modularity and grid the new freedom in the use of creative technology and design?
I would say in the spirit of future futures, it's one of the futures, right?
It's amazing.
It's one possibility among many others, for sure.
And we don't have time today, but we can just go into nature itself, which we always think of organic, right, Lucy? And you studied your climate change. Nature is completely gridded. When you get down to the molecular structure of nature, it's a grid. So, you know, I think we tend to organize communication and our technology in a grid because that's the way nature is organized. You know, there is an organization to nature. And if we can understand that too, it becomes more organic. Like Mike said, you know, the grid is not restricting your being organic or authentic. It's allowing you, and we always talk about this.
We need to be a bit more respectful of nature's grid right now.
Yeah, exactly. And big time, instead of removing ourselves, to embrace the fact that gridded structure or the concept of structure is organic. And then how do we understand what we do as part of this system? So anyway, I think we're gonna have to end on that. Now that we've come with the new thing, we've just thrown typography out of the back of graphic design, and it's gone even to the smaller unit, which I agree, it's the smaller unit of typography too. We're back to the small modular grid, whether it's a 2 pixel by 2 pixel or 4 by 4 or 8 by 8 or the larger scalable. But we've now, what a great revelation. Whoever here is going to write the paper, please write the paper.
We should all collaborate.
We should all collaborate. But I want to thank you very much, but all, 3 of you, I know we've had, don't feel bad. You're not the only person who's had technological difficulties. Mike, we had our keynote speaker, the very first keynote speaker, Ivy Ross, had technical difficulty and she wasn't able to show anything. So you've joined a very unique club. But thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate it. I know there are other sessions happening today. And I hope that all 3 of you will be involved as we expand our Capture This project. because to us, communication and language is beyond just typefaces, but it could be about illustrations, it could be about emojis, it could be, you know, how do we communicate differently now? And so thank you, Brad, thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Mike. And thank you, Robbie, and your team, Paloma, from Entrepreneurship and Professional Development, and of course, the HMCT team, which we could never do without here. And we'll see you again really soon. And thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Super inspiring to see
Bye.
everyone's work. Thanks, Gloria, for putting this together.
Appreciate it. Thanks for-
Thank
thanks for
you.
having me.
Okay, guys.
Bye.
And
Bye-bye.
just a final quick note here. Our final session is at 1 o'clock Pacific time today, and we'll very much address some of the questions that were raised here as well with Julian Scaff and Idris Sandhu.
Do you
So
have
please-
do you have the link you can put in the chat room, Robbie?
Yes, I can do that right now.
So we won't end the meeting until Robbie puts that in the chat room. Although you can find it on the website, ArtCenter's website.
Yes, if you found your way in here, but I've got it here, and it's nice to just go straight in there. So you'll see this in the chat momentarily. And thank you everyone for staying with us a little extra, and Gloria for steering us through, and Mike for persevering. We so appreciate it. Brilliant conversation.
Yes.
I'm gonna have my gin and tea now.
Yeah.
Yes,
loved it.
me too.
Time for your evening drink. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
You guys, bye-bye.
Bye.